For the second part of today's assignment, we are going to write the fraction, an equivalent, equal, decimal for each grid. Please make sure that you have watched part 1 of today's lesson and that you have the notes available as a refresher. If you have not, please go to your agenda, click on part 1 to watch that first video. For now, let's go ahead and get started. For number 1, let's keep in mind, how many squares do we have here? We have 100. And we know when we have 100, does the total number go is the numerator or the denominator? Does it go on the top as the numerator or the denominator? Yes. The denominator is how many parts we have total. The first thing we're going to do is write how many parts we have total. And I know that we have 100 because this is a 100 block. So I know my denominator, my bottom number, is going to be 100. How many squares do I have shaded? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yes, I have 8 squares shaded, and 8 is going to be my numerator. Remember, my shaded area, whether it's a circle, a number line, my top number, my numerator, tells me the part that I have. And for number 1, there are 8 shaded squares, so my numerator is 8. I have 8 shaded squares out of 100 that I see. This is represented as a fraction by 8 100ths. 8 out of 100. Here comes the part for our new information. How can we write this as a decimal? How can we write 8 100ths as a decimal? It's going to help to use our decimal place value chart. I know you have this from your notes. 8 hundredths. I use my place value chart to find my hundredths, and that's where I put my 8. I only have 8 hundredths. I have 8 of the 100 squares. To write that as a decimal is 0.08. 8 hundredths. Think of it, go back to our money example. I have 8 cents, 8 pennies out of the whole dollar. Just like I would write 8 cents, how we practiced in part 1, I would write the same to represent it as a decimal, 0.08, or I have 8 cents out of 100 pennies. 8 hundredths is the same as 0.08, 8 hundredths. For number 2, my denominator, of course, will be the total number of squares that I have. We know this is a 100 block. What is my denominator? How many pieces of this puzzle do I have? Yes, 100. So my denominator is 100. How much of the area is shaded? When I look at this grid, how much of the area is shaded? Let's count. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70. Just a reminder, I'm counting by tens because I know there are 10 blocks in each column. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 71, 72. Where do I put that 72? Yes, I put that as my numerator. I have shaded 72 out of the 100 squares on the grid. I shaded 72 of the 100 squares on the grid. I counted by tens because I know each column has 10 blocks. So 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 to 72. How can I write that as a decimal? Yes. 0. I know that's 0 because I did not shade the whole thing. I do not have a whole number. I only have part of this whole grid shaded in. So I know right away I will have 0 point, 0 and 0 and my decimal. Because the whole thing is not colored in, my whole grid is not colored. So it has to be 0. I'm showing you with the decimal, the fraction or part that I have colored in. It may help to use your place value chart. Let's go back and use it. Using my place value chart, 0.7 2. When I say that, I have 0 and 72 hundredths. Notice I said and because I can say and when I have a decimal point. 0 and 72 hundredths. I wrote a fraction and decimal for this grid. 0 and 72 hundredths. For number 3, I want you to try to do that one on your own. Write a fraction that represents the grid, the part that's shaded, and then write a decimal. Write a fraction, then a decimal for this grid, just as we've done before for 1 and 2. Let's keep moving. The second part of this assignment, we are going to color part of each grid to show the decimal given. We're going to color part of each grid to show the decimal given. The first example is 0.9. How do we say that? How can we read this 0.9? Well, let's go back to our place value chart. Zero and 9/10. 0 and 9/10. We are going to shade 0 and 9/10 on our grid. Now is a good time to refer to our notes from part 1. If I have 0.9 or 9/10, I need 9/10 shaded in. That's what needs to be shaded in. Let's go do that. Back to my grid, I'm going to shade in 9/10. We know each column represents a tenth, so let's go ahead and shade in 9/10. How does that look? There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So I shaded in 9/10. The part of the grid I colored was 0.9 9/10. Making sure it's shaded in really good. You should only have 10 empty spots because we shaded in 9/10. Or to write that as a fraction, and I do want you to write it as a fraction. I know it's not on there, but I want to see that we can represent this as a fraction. We shaded in 90 of the 100 squares on our grid. That's the decimal. We shaded in that amount, and we also have the fraction. I know it doesn't say to write the fraction, but I want to see your fraction. Let's keep going. Number 5. How can we say this? 0.09. Back to the handy dandy place value chart that I know you have on your paper. 9 hundredths. 9 hundredths. 9 hundredths. What will we color? Yes, we are only going to color 9 of our cubes. Now, how can I represent that as a fraction? It's 9. That's the amount that's shaded over 100. Complete number 6 on your own. Color the part of grid to show the decimal given. How can you show this? By shading in the area and then write the fraction. Give you a hint. The denominator is 100, which is our numerator. Complete number 6 on your own. After you do that, it's your time to get creative. Get creative. Color part of each grid and write the decimal represented. You get to choose which part of the grid you want to color. Make sure that you're coloring in the same column. Don't color a square here and a square here. Keep your squares together so it's easy for you to count and recognize. For example, going to my drawing tool, I'm going to use purple. Coloring that whole row. Coloring the second row. The third row. And why not? Let's color the fourth row too. As a decimal, I'm going to use my text box tool to write 0.4 or 4/10. 4/10. I colored 4 of the 10 rods that you see. 4/10. And I was just being creative. I made this up on my own. I colored the amount of the grid that I wanted, and then I represented it with the decimal. You are going to do the same for 8 and 9. Color the part of the grid that you like and write the decimal that's represented. Once you have finished, turn it in and then submit.